Well, I want to thank everybody for coming this afternoon. Before I outline our plan for putting our 2010 budget back in balance, I did want to start out and make three observations. The first is that this is the most challenging budget time in Kansas history. We've gone back and looked at state revenue collections, and we are unable to find a time where state revenues have declined more than 1 year. In other words, we can't find a time when state revenues have declined even 2 years in a row. We are now facing the 4th year in a row of declines in state revenues. This has been particularly challenging for the 2010 budget, which has been absolutely decimated by this decline in state revenues. We're now on our 5th round of budget cutting and are approaching almost $1 billion in cuts on a state general fund that at the time that this all started was slightly over $6 billion. $1 billion in cuts in a $6 billion organization is enormous. So it's been incredibly challenging. Secondly, we have continued our policy of shared solutions. Our belief is that the Kansas way of handling a crisis is for everyone to pull together and for everyone to share in the solution that is ultimately reached. After this fifth round of budget cutting, there will not be a single agency or a single branch of government that has not been affected by this incredible reduction in revenues that we have reached. I've personally spoken with the stakeholders of the folks that are receiving the largest cuts to brief them on what we've done and the reason that we've done it. And I will tell you that as devastating as these cuts are to some groups, I think Kansans would be proud in the way that the stakeholders have accepted the decisions that we've made. The notion that Kansans pull together in a time of crisis has been proven out time and time again as we have worked through this 2010 budget. And I want to thank the stakeholder groups who I briefed today in talking about these difficult decisions that we've made. And the third observation that I would have is that there are no longer any easy answers. To those that would say that there was waste in state government, I would say that prior to our initial cuts, they were undoubtedly correct. But we squeezed the waste in state government out several cuts ago. The cuts that we made in July and the cuts that we are announcing now are not to waste. The waste is gone. The cuts that we are making now are to basic services. So you will hear recipients of funds talk about larger classrooms. You will hear them talk about the possibility of closing schools. You will hear agencies or perhaps branches of government that will need to furlough employees. These are not false cries. These are real things that are happening as a result of the dramatic decline in revenues that we've had and the cuts that we are announcing today. Last week, when we announced the energy efficiency program, I was able to highlight kind of an unknown person in state government, which is Joe Harkins, and talk about the remarkable work that he's done behind the scenes for so many years in so many different parts of government. Today, before I talk about these cuts, I want to talk just briefly about Dwayne Gosen and the incredible asset that he's been to our state for so many years. He's been very helpful in us trying to develop a way to fill a very large number and impact the smallest number of people possible. Dwayne and his team have truly been remarkable. I also want to thank our cabinet officials and our internal staff, all of whom are taking significant cuts in their agencies, and yet all of whom we have worked with side by side in making all this possible. Having said that, let me walk through 6 very general categories of changes that we're making that allow us to fill this budget hole of $258 million. The first is that we are making strategic budget cuts to virtually every agency, and the details of that are outlined in the handout that you've received. The details really get into the minutia, but suffice it to say that virtually everyone's been cut. Unfortunately, in this round of allotments, we even had to cut corrections, which we were able to exclude from the cuts back in July. Also highlighted upon this would be that we're also cutting the judicial branch. We're asking for a $3 million cut to the judicial branch, which is approximately 3% of its budget. So the first general area is cutting agencies. The second general area relates to a transfer of $50 million from the highway fund to the state general fund. This would be effectuated by special legislation that we will be asking the legislature to act upon immediately when it returns in January. This will not result in the elimination of any projects that were announced under the Comprehensive Highway Plan, nor will it result in the changes to any of the 4 major projects that we announced after the Recovery Act, but it will significantly reduce the amount of maintenance that we're doing on our roads during fiscal year 2010. Thirdly, we are withholding $5 million of the transfer to the Bioscience Authority. This still allows the Bioscience Authority to receive $35 million. In our discussions with the Bioscience Authority, this is a sufficient amount for it to meet its 2010 obligations, and so that's the third change that we're making. The fourth change that we're making relates to education. We are taking K through 12 and the regents down to the 2006 spending levels, which is the minimum level that's allowed under the Recovery Act. This obviously achieves a savings of $38 million. In addition, we are not recommending the funding of $155.8 million, which is the dollar amount that resulted as a result of increased enrollment above the levels of expectations. The fifth change that we're making is that we are absorbing any unspent funds from agencies or branches of government that have been carried over from 2009. This includes money that was carried over in this office. We are also asking the legislature to take its carryover funds, which are in the range of $2.2 million, and put those back in the general fund. So that's our fifth major category. Our sixth category relates to Medicaid reimbursement. Starting immediately, we are reducing Medicaid reimbursement rates by 10%. We believe that this will save the state general fund approximately $22 million during the final 3 months of the fiscal year. Although the change goes into effect immediately, it will take a while because of delays in billing cycle and in payments for it to reflect in the general fund itself. And so the overall impact will really only be felt for the final 3 months of this fiscal year. And then the final action that we're taking is that we're drawing down an additional $85.9 million in our Recovery Act money. You will recall that as a result of the Recovery Act, Kansas was given approximately $560 million to utilize in either fiscal year 2010 or fiscal year 2011. I made the decision that the prudent thing to do was to attempt to only spend half of our money in fiscal year 2010 and the other half in fiscal year 2011 to even out the impact that it would have on budget years. There are many states that were unable to meet that goal. We believe that there are at least 10 states that spent all of their money in fiscal year 2010. We believe that the large majority of other states spent a majority of their funds in 2010. We now join that large majority of other states by drawing down the $85.9 million from the Recovery Act. There are 3 additional points that I'd like to make, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. The first point relates to the Recovery Act itself. I think that folks could legitimately ask, why don't you draw down all of the money from the Recovery Act so that you don't have to make any cuts? And other people might criticize this action for drawing down $85.9 million and saying that it makes fiscal year 2011 harder and we shouldn't have drawn any of it down. My response to both is that in everything there is a balance. And we've got to maintain a balance in the approach that we take to the budget. If we had drawn down all of our remaining Recovery Act funds for fiscal year 2010, if we had drawn down the entire amount, it would have created such a significant budget hole for 2011 that I was unable to come up with any plan that would allow us to have a budget that would have reasonably funded state programs. On the other hand, if we hadn't drawn down any of the remaining Recovery Act money, we would have had to have cut an additional $85.9 million, and I could not come up with any additional reasonable cuts that, in my opinion, would not have crippled either education or some other part of state government. I think we've reached a reasonable balance by drawing down $85.9 million, and so that's the action that I've taken. Second point is, why now? Why not wait until the legislature comes back in January, or why not call a special session? I think calling a special session would simply cost taxpayers money with no guaranteed result. We've seen state after state across the country call special sessions. They've gone long, they've been expensive, and they have often not achieved anything. The reason to not wait until January is that these cuts come out of this year's budget. They come out of the money that folks are spending on programs this year. The recipients of our funds need to know what their allocations are for this year. If we would have waited an additional 2 months, and the legislator could have acted very quickly in January, those recipients of funds would have only had 5 months left in the fiscal year to respond and react to any budget cuts. By making the announcements now, the recipients of funds, I believe, can act in a prudent way. The third point I have to make is that unfortunately there is still work to do. Even with these drastic actions that we're taking today, we still face a budget hole for 2011. I hope that with the actions that we've taken today, we've once again demonstrated a balanced, professional, reasonable, compassionate, business-like approach to this process. And I am hopeful that when the legislature returns in January, that we will avoid the partisan politics that we've seen permeate the country and instead look at the budget in a reasonable, nonpartisan way. Even though it's an election year in 2010, the decisions that we will make will be difficult and challenging, and the only way that we can reach reasonable solutions are if we all come together and work together as Kansans to achieve them. And finally, to the recipients of funds who are hurt by this, I am genuinely sorry. To the hundreds of thousands of Kansans that have been hurt by the recession, I am genuinely sorry. To the folks in Kansas that continue to do well, that have the resources to help out those in need, as we come upon Thanksgiving and the holiday season, I encourage all Kansans that are doing well to dig deep into your wallets and into your hearts and contribute to your churches, to your local charities. Help folks that are out there in need, because we still have a significant number of them as a result of this recession. I continue to be an optimist, despite the fact that we've had revenue declines for 4 years, despite the fact that we've had to have 5 rounds of budget cuts. I am 100% certain that we will come out of this recession. And history indicates that the longer and deeper the recession is, the more profound the recovery is. People still need automobiles. They still need houses. Eventually, companies will start buying small airplanes again, and there will be such a pent-up demand that when we come out of this, the recovery will be spectacular. In the meantime, we've got to continue to pull together as we have and make it through as Kansas has always done by working together side by side and helping those in need.